All right, we're back in another Sound the Battle Cry. And today, the title of the message is C.S. Lewis, His Occult Connections, Order of the Golden Dawn, Rosicrucianism, and Theosophy. Now, this may be an emotional topic for many of you who are watching this. You don't want to hear something like this. You don't want to believe it's true because you grew up reading this man's books, maybe even watching some movies, the Narnia movies, and all those other types of things. But we got a proverb for you, Proverbs 18:13, which says, "He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and a shame unto him." Okay? Do not jump to a conclusion and dismiss something out of hand before you hear it. You need to investigate the matter completely, then make a decision after. But you need to look into the facts first. A secular version of this would be Albert Einstein's quote, which is, condemnation before investigation is the height of ignorance. Okay, so you don't condemn before you investigate. Don't answer the matter before you hear it. Just hear it out. That's all I'm asking. Now, C.S. Lewis. I grew up having these books. I was given his books, Chronicles of Narnia books. I saw the old films and those types of things. I don't think maybe I watched one of the newer ones, but I definitely watched the older ones and had the books. Okay, so this isn't something that I didn't grow up with. But here's the thing. Why am I doing this show? A couple reasons. First of all, I had this information a long time ago, over 8 years ago. And I actually gave all this information to a pastor in the past. He took the information, kind of butchered it, and put it online. He got like 40,000 views off of it and all that stuff. And it was fine at the time. But it's time for that information to come back out. And I'm the one that gave that information. Number two, I saw recently on a Jay Dyer, who is a researcher. He's written a couple books, Esoteric Hollywood. He does a lot of research about conspiracy, all those other types of things. He hosted the 4th hour of the Alex Jones Show. And he was trying to say that C.S. Lewis and Tolkien were good guys who were warning against a technocracy and all this stuff because of C.S. Lewis's science fiction trilogy, especially the third book, which is called That Hideous Strength. And immediately I thought this was ridiculous because of what I knew about C.S. Lewis, that he was this good guy supposedly warning against these types of things. And it's kind of confusing coming from a person like Jay Dyer because he is a really good researcher for the most part. But in this instance, completely was wrong, off the target. So I don't know what's going on with that. Either he just something that he missed and he hasn't had access to information that I'm going to present today, or maybe it was intentional. I don't know. I'm not going to accuse him of that. I'll be charitable and say that he just didn't know. Nevertheless, we're going to get into some information today that is very important and very clear. I don't think you can deny this, okay? It's pretty apparent C.S. Lewis's connections to the Order of the Golden Dawn, Rosicrucianism, as I said, Theosophy, paganism, his friends, his fascination with paganism and the occult, all these other types of things. There's just it's overwhelming. And the fact that he put it in his books, his books are saturated with witchcraft and paganism. And so it really shouldn't be that big of a shock to a lot of people. But for some reason, this man, C.S. Lewis, is so venerated today, exalted in Christian circles of many different persuasions and denominations. Everybody loves this guy. They love to quote him and to, push his views and quote and all this other type of stuff, his books. But we're going to see a picture painted today that shows a very, very different type of man than is often portrayed by most modern-day Christendom. All right, so let's read a few more scriptures and we'll get into the information. 1 John 4:1. Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. Okay? We got to try the spirits. We got to test them. The false prophets. There's a lot of false prophets. Jesus said there'll be many that come in my name, many false prophets that would deceive many people. That's why the first thing he said is take heed that no man deceive you. So you got to test everything and everyone. Don't just blindly accept and trust things. Like if everybody just blindly pushes C.S. Lewis, you got to question it and go, okay, well, what's the deal with this guy? Why don't I read about him? What's his background? Here's another one, Ephesians 5:11, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. Don't fellowship with them, but reprove them. Drag them into the light. Shine the light on these unfruitful works of darkness. And then the last one is Job 34:21 and 22. For his eyes are upon the ways of man, and he seeth all his goings. There is no darkness, nor shadow of death, where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. Nowhere to hide. You know, secret societies, mystery schools, they love to hide. Everything's under the cover of secrecy and darkness. There is no darkness where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. Why? Because the eyes of God are upon the ways of man, and he seeth all his going. He sees everything. And it's going to be made manifest. Be sure your sin will find you out. All right? So, we're going to get into this information, and I'm going to give you all the sources. And in fact, there's so much more information that I can't even present today that I'm going to give you all the links. You could go and research way more yourself and see way more evidence. Go check all the primary source documentation. Check all the quotes. Check it all for yourself. We could sit here and talk about this for 12 hours, chasing every, rabbit hole. But we're going to condense it down today. All right, so let's get into it. So first of all, I'm just going to show you real quick. If you go to this website, which is crossroad.to, there's a lot of these resources on here, a lot of articles about C.S. Lewis. And so if you want to go research this yourself, I'll leave a link for this. But we have quotes here exposing C.S. Lewis putting witchcraft and occult philosophies. Like it says here, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Rosicrucianism, Swedenborgism, Freemasonry, Hegelian dialectic, all this stuff, all blended with Christianity and swayed the beliefs of C.S. Lewis. He put those beliefs in these books. We got excerpts from The Magician's Nephew, The Abolition of Man, Mere Christianity, Surprised by Joy, Discarded Image, That Hideous Strength, Chronology. Okay, so you see all these different articles. You can scroll down there. You can look at that. All right, but we're going to get into the information I want to go over today. But that just shows you how much there is to go through. All right, so I'm going to hold your hand and go through some of this stuff. This article called Trouble in Narnia, the Occult Side of C.S. Lewis. Okay, now, this is the main one we're going to focus on. And I have some additional resources I'm going to be adding to this. And we're going to jump around to a few more key points here to add to this. All right? So I'm just going to read from the article and make some comments as we go through. This person said, I've been uneasy about the enthusiasm for Narnia. Then one morning I woke up vividly remembering some things in the third Narnia book, and now I recognize the root of what has been troubling me. I had read all of C.S. Lewis's books, including his essays, his collection of letters, his science fiction, and his Narnia books. I read most of the books more than once, and I read the Narnia books many times. I also read all the books of Charles Williams, because he was a close friend of Lewis's, and Lewis spoke so highly of his books. And I read all of George MacDonald's books, because Lewis admired him and spoke well of his books. We're going to take a look at those guys more later. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is the third book in the Narnia series. It directly promotes spells and magic. Chapter 10, The Magician's Book, features a book of spells that is on an island inhabited by invisible creatures called Dufflepuds. Lucy works a spell to make the Dufflepuds visible. She goes through a spell book, and it is beautiful and fascinating. Then she finds the right spell and says the words and follows the instructions. And then the Dufflepuds and Aslan become visible. Her spell made Aslan visible, and he is pleased with what she did. So, if you guys don't know, in the Narnia books, Aslan is supposed to represent Jesus Christ. He's supposed to be this lion that represents Jesus. Now, so going with the allegory, right? Because it's supposed to be, they say, oh, this is, Christian, it's a Christian allegory. He just uses symbolism, but he has a different message. Well, how does this fit the allegory and the symbolism if he has someone casting a spell to make Jesus Christ visible as Aslan? How does that make any sense? And he's pleased with what she did. You think Jesus would be pleased if you did a witchcraft spell to make him appear, that you're trying to do that? The book of spells is beautiful and fascinating. One spell is, they're not saying that it's good. They're just saying it's beautiful in the sense that that's what's alluring to children. And by the way, this guy's pretty sick in the head that he targeted children in all these books, right? The Narnia books. And you're going to see more and more how dark it really gets later. I'm going to prove it. I'm going to bring stuff out you probably never heard of in your life. One spell is illustrated with pictures of bees that look like as if they're really flying. In the world of C.S. Lewis's day, this would not have caused practical problems. However, these days, kids can go to regular bookstores and buy spell books written by modern witches. Yeah, today it's just everything's, it's the explosion of the occult is all over everywhere. There's no hesitation, no warnings about it. And in fact, anyone that warns against it is called a lunatic. That's pretty much that. Many Christians are treating the Narnia books as being an allegory, with Aslan representing Jesus and the children representing Christians. If you do this with the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, then you portray Jesus as being pleased with Christians doing magic and working spells. Right, exactly. And you support the idea that there are good spells and good magic. That belief is the basis for modern white witchcraft. Right? However, the Bible clearly forbids any form of witchcraft. Right, so let's go to that quote. But yeah, it's that whole white magic versus black magic thing, right? And that's absolutely false. There's no distinction made in the Bible. There's nowhere in the Bible that you can justify saying, well, there's good magic and bad magic. No, all magic, all witchcraft, all sorcery, it's all condemned. All of it. And let's look at some of the practices that are specifically named in the Bible. Okay? And this isn't part of some Old Testament ceremonial law, like, unclean meats or something like that. No. These are practices that are condemned in the New Testament as well. But let's read from Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 through 12. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer, for all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. Okay, so all these occult practices, any form of divination, witchcraft, all that stuff, it's all condemned. And then these occult practices condemned again. In the New Testament under the umbrella of witchcraft and sorcery. Okay, so in the New Testament, it doesn't list out every single one of these practices, but it's still the same things are condemned. Okay, so let's look at a couple verses. Galatians chapter 5, verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft. Witchcraft condemned there. And then later on it says, they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. And then Revelation 21:8. But the fearful, unbelieving, the abominable, murderers, whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Okay, so witchcraft, sorcery is condemned in the New Testament, not just the Old. But the Old gives you a little bit more of the detail of what goes under that umbrella. All right, so let's go back to the article. There's no such thing as white and black witchcraft. Now, they might make the distinction because they go, well, white witches don't harm anything. We don't do sacrifices. We don't sacrifice anything, not even animals. We don't harm anything. right? That's what they try to say. But they still have no problem dealing with spirits and all these practices that are condemned. There's no different. And you're still messing with the same thing. They even show that in the, I did the show about the Force in Star Wars. They talk about how, and don't worry, I know it's fiction, but it's based on real life principles, where they say that there's the dark side and the light side of the Force, right? But they get their power from the same force. They just say it's two sides of the same force. And there's an admission there. Okay? So let's continue. In the book, the Dufflepuds are ruled by a wizard. He uses magic to rule the Dufflepuds because they aren't yet mature enough to be ruled directly by Aslan. So there is good magic and a good wizard. This magic prepares people for relationship with Aslan. Again, if Aslan is taken as a symbol for Jesus, then magic prepares people to become Christians. How does any of this make sense that a Christian would write this stuff? In our modern culture, that would mean that Wicca is a way to get to know Jesus and become his follower, which is absolutely absurd. Back when C.S. Lewis wrote the Narnia stories, Wicca did not exist. Witchcraft did, but the modern day old religion, Wicca, that they made modern day old religion. I mean, the modern day religion created by Gerald Gardner, that practice, that didn't exist. It was starting to form. Kids who read the books couldn't experiment with spells, but this is a different world today. Now kids are surrounded by movies and TV shows that promote witchcraft, and they may know kids at their school who dabble. Yeah, I mean, again, the access to all these other types of things, it's much easier to find books on the occult, these types of practices. It's saturated everywhere in our culture. It's a lot easier to get involved with those types of things. What will happen when Disney comes out with a movie of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader? I don't know if they have yet, but I mean, Disney comes out with occultic stuff all the time. Tons of their films are filled with occultism going on in there, different types of practices. It's just, so it doesn't matter if they don't have that specific movie. Christian kids may wind up feeling free to practice magic, and this could help break down the barrier between Christianity and Wicca. It could Christianize witchcraft in the eyes of some Christian kids, yeah. Well, anybody. It doesn't matter who it is. You know, and that's the thing. It's like, it's interesting because on the one hand, a lot of people in society treat the occult as if it's a joke. Don't take it seriously at all. Then there's the other side who don't think it's a joke, but they don't see a problem partaking of it, and they're involved with many different occult practices, and more prevalent than ever. Okay? But the point is that it's a lot easier for kids to get involved with this stuff. And it is true that the types of films that they watch when they're younger will spark curiosity in their minds. Now, I believe that if you just shelter kids and just tell them you can't watch anything and you shut them all off and you say why, because it's of the devil, that's not good either. And that can actually push them in the other direction, so that when they turn 18, first thing they do is go headlong into all that stuff, is a rebellion, right? What's important is to teach about it. Okay? If your kids are going to have a lot of questions, so if they ask questions, you got to be able to explain. Okay? Explain why things are not correct. All right, so let's continue. Okay, there are some other, we're going to get into some crazy stuff, so please stay tuned. There are some other problems with C.S. Lewis's widespread influence. Blending God's truth with occult tales, he laid an enticing foundation for apostasy. For starters, in understanding the man, here's a quotation from a letter that he wrote describing a trip that he and his wife Joy took to Greece in 1960. He wrote, now this quote is wild. C.S. Lewis said, I had some ado to prevent Joy and myself from relapsing into paganism in Attica. At Daphne, it was hard not to pray to Apollo the healer, but somehow one didn't feel it would have been very wrong. And Lewis also said that Christianity fulfilled paganism and paganism prefigured Christianity. We got the sources at the bottom here, so we could look at those quotes. But he said it was hard for me not to relapse into paganism and hard not to pray to a Paul the Hero. Let me tell you something. I'm a Christian. I've never had a temptation to pray to an idol in my entire time of being saved. Not one time. That is a very, very strange thing for a professing Christian to say. So, we're going to, like I said, we're going to have quotes like this from him. But then also, when you see who he's associated with and who he praises as his spiritual mentors and stuff, I mean, the picture that it paints is probably even so crazy that I can't even explain it all to you in this show because a lot of you won't even understand it. But we're going to do as much as we can. In his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, Lewis tells how at age 13 he abandoned his Anglican faith due to the influence of a school mistress who was involved with Theosophy, Rosicrucianism, spiritualism, the whole Anglo-American occultist tradition. Now, we're going to be talking more about Theosophy and Rosicrucianism, so stay tuned for that. And Lewis developed a lust for the occult that remained with him even after he returned to Anglicanism. He said, quote, "And that started in me something with which, on and off, I have had plenty of trouble since. The desire for the preternatural, simply as such, the passion for the occult." The passion for the occult, C.S. Lewis said. Not everyone has this disease. Those who have will know what I mean. I once tried to describe it in a novel. It is a spiritual lust, and like the lust of the body, it has the fatal power of making everything else in the world seem uninteresting while it lasts. Okay? C.S. Lewis said he had such a passion and lust for the occult, he couldn't give it up. Lewis said that he described that lust for the occult in a novel. It occurs in the third book of his science fiction trilogy, and that book would be called That Hideous Strength. A man is in the process of being initiated into an inner ring of scientists who are occultists. They worship demons, which they call macrobes, huge, powerful, invisible things, as opposed to microbes, which are tiny, invisible things. Here's a quote from the book. "Here, here, surely at last," so his desire whispered to him, "was the true inner circle of all, the circle whose center was outside the human race, the ultimate secret, the supreme power, the last initiation. The fact that it was almost completely horrible did not in the least diminish its attraction." And then it continues, "These creatures," demons, "breathed death on the human race and on all joy. Not despite this, but because of this. The terrible gravitation sucked and tugged and fascinated him towards them. Never before had he known the fruitful strength of the movement opposite to nature, which now had him in its grip. The impulse to reverse all reluctances and to draw every circle anti-clockwise." From That Hideous Strength, page 269. Okay, so, like I said earlier, some were trying to say that he was warning against this type of thing, this inner circle running things, kind of like the World Economic Forum or whatever, and then technocracy. But that theory starts to fall apart when you see what he was into and the people he was associated with and what they were into. None of that makes any sense whatsoever. Note that Lewis said that he had trouble with that lust for the occult ever since his encounter with the matron in his boys' school. He wrote that statement in 1955. By then, he had written all but 3 of his books. Lewis dedicated his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, to Bede Griffiths. We're not going to go more into depth with that guy, but that guy was a Catholic Benedictine monk, and a lot of crazy stuff with that guy. But if you want, you can click that link and go check that out. A former student of his who became a longtime friend. Griffiths founded a Christian ashram in India. He said that Hindu temples are a sacrament, and he said no one can say in the proper sense that the Hindu, the Buddhist, or the Muslim is an unbeliever. I would say rather that we have to recognize him as our brother in Christ. So B. Griffiths said that, and C.S. Lewis dedicated his autobiography to B. Griffiths. What B. Griffiths did and said is the logical conclusion of a statement that C.S. Lewis made in Mere Christianity. He said, quote, "There are people in other religions who are being led by God's secret influence to concentrate on those parts of their religion which are in agreement with Christianity, and who thus belong to Christ without knowing it." Wrong. For example, a Buddhist of goodwill may be led to concentrate more and more on the Buddhist teaching about mercy and to leave in the background, though he might still say he has believed, the Buddhist teaching on certain other points. Many of the good pagans, long before Christ's birth, may have been in this position. Okay? It's so insane to me that, Mere Christianity is recommended by so many modern day Christians. And this quote is in that book. How the heck can they not read this and go, this is not the words of a Christian? It's not. Okay? This is someone who does not know the gospel. Okay? Let's just be plain about that. Or they do and they've rejected it. Okay? Because he says, other people in other religions who are being led by God to concentrate on those parts of religion which are in agreement with Christianity. Wrong. God doesn't do that. He causes them to turn from their idols to God. And, like a Buddhist, he might focus on mercy and all this stuff. That doesn't do anything. He says the same thing about the pagans. He's basically saying they can be saved by their works, by trying to be a good person. That's what C.S. Lewis is teaching. Now, how in the world is that considered or how in the world, because the biggest group that are promoting this guy are Evangelical Christians, even though he is quoted by Catholics and other people, Orthodox Christians. But evangelicals could look at that and not see plain as day that he's teaching work salvation. That pagans and Buddhists can be saved by trying to be a good person? Even though the Bible says not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to his mercy he saved us? For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Ephesians 2:8-9. C.S. Lewis is directly contradicting these scriptures. And he's promoting a universalism where Buddhists and pagans are saved. Let's continue. Lewis said that he was strongly influenced by George MacDonald. We're going to talk about him next. Who was a universalist. Oh, well, there you go. MacDonald's book, Lilith, we're going to look at that, is based on an occult teaching that Adam was married to a demon named Lilith before he married Eve. By the end of MacDonald's book, Lilith is redeemed. And Adam says that even the devil will eventually be redeemed, saved. All right, so let's take a look at this book, Lilith, by George MacDonald. Talk a little bit about George MacDonald. Here's a couple quotes. Kurt Brunner, Birthing Narnia. Lewis would credit George MacDonald with having influenced virtually every word he ever wrote. It began with Phantastes, a dreamlike tale in which a boy wishes to visit fairy country. He awakes the next morning in an enchanted wood where he encounters profound happiness mixed with perilous adventure, including death and rebirth of sorts. And so, thanks to the imagination of George MacDonald, C.S. Lewis found his way home. Yeah, his home to paganism. Here's another quote from the book Lilith by George MacDonald. When God created me, Adam, not out of nothing, as say the unwise, but out of his own endless glory, he brought me in angelic splendor to be my wife. There she, Lilith, lies, for her first thought was power. She had so ensnared the heart of the great shadow, Satan, that he became her slave, wrought her will, and made her queen of hell. Vilest of God's creatures, she lives by the blood and lives and souls of men. Now, I don't know if you guys understand, this is written by a witch, okay? Straight up, George MacDonald is writing exactly how a witch would write, talking about Lilith. This is what witches teach. It's pure occult teaching. That's all it is. C.S. Lewis never hid his fascination with the mystical fantasy. 17 years after his supposed conversion to Christianity, 17 years after, he wrote because this is what some people try to say, oh, well, that was before his conversion. No, it wasn't. All this stuff is after. After. He wrote the following endorsement of Lilith and other books by George MacDonald in his 1948 book, George MacDonald, an Anthology. Okay, guys, just this alone just blows the whole idea of who C.S. Lewis was apart. What Christian would ever endorse a book called Lilith? Especially considering what was written in the story. But let's look. You know how bad it was? C.S. Lewis said, I regarded George MacDonald as my master. Unreal, huh? I regarded George MacDonald as my master. Indeed, I fancy I have never written a book in which I did not quote from him. I mean, could you offer any higher praise of someone? So George MacDonald he regarded as his master, the man who wrote the book Lilith. Let's continue. Introducing MacDonald's Lilith, Lewis wrote this. He wrote the introduction. He, George MacDonald, was born in 1824. In 1850, he received what is technically known as a call to become the minister of a dissenting chapel in Arundel. By 1852, he was in trouble with the deacons for heresy, the charges being that he had expressed belief in a future state of probation for heathens and that he was trained with German theology. What he does best is fantasy. Fantasy that hovers between the allegorical and the mythopoeic. This, in my opinion, he does better than any man. Here's another quote. It must be more than 30 years ago that I bought the Everyman edition of Fantastes. A few hours later, I knew that I had crossed a great frontier. I had already been waist deep in romanticism, and likely enough at any moment to flounder into its darker and more evil forms, slithering down the steep descent that leads from the love of strangeness to that of eccentricity, and thence to that of perversity. Nothing was at that time further from my thoughts than Christianity, and I therefore had no notion what this difference really was. I was only aware that if this new world was strange, it was also homely and humble. That if this was a dream, it was a dream in which one at least felt strangely vigilant. That the whole book also had about it a sort of cool morning innocence, and also, quite unmistakably, a certain quality of death. Good death. What it actually did to me was to convert, even to baptize. That was where the death came in, my imagination. It did nothing to my intellect, nor at that time to my conscience. He said what it did to me was to baptize my imagination. And one more quote. From C.S. Lewis. The quality which had enchanted me in his imaginative works turned out to be the quality of the real universe, the divine, magical, terrifying, and ecstatic reality in which we all live. All right, these are C.S. Lewis quotes introducing the Lilith book. On the opposite page, across from C.S. Lewis's name in the introduction to MacDonald's book, readers will find a second title page and a short revealing quote from the Kabbalah. Here's the quote. Lilith, a romance. Off, Lilith, the Kabbalah. That's not surprising. The Kabbalah is based on occult myths that twist biblical truth into horrendous lies. In this mystical realm, Lilith was the first wife of Adam, a rebellious fallen angel. She plays that demonic role in this dark, disturbing book, which we don't recommend anyone, right? Hidden from the public eye for centuries, the mysterious Kabbalah has more recently entered the religious marketplace. In the 18th, 19th, and 20th century Europe, and to a lesser extent in America, Kabbalistic mysticism mingled with medieval alchemy and Hermetic magic in various popular occult systems and secret societies. As occult visions, dreams, and philosophies merged and evolved, they gave birth to new forms of occultism, which captivated receptive audiences such as Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, Swedenborg, Theosophy, and its offshoot, Anthroposophy. Yeah, we'll talk about that later. The latter was conceived by Rudolf Steiner, mentioned by Lewis in The Abolition of Man. Rudolf Steiner, interesting character. The founder of the Waldorf schools. You might have heard of those before. Owen Barfield, we'll talk about him too, who Lewis referred to as his second closest friend, was also drawn to these occult blends and eventually embraced Steiner's revision of Theosophy. We're going to show some more information about that, though, Theosophy and Rosicrucianism and the Kabbalah. Okay, so let's skip down there and one more quote here. And another example of today's cultural immersion in occultic philosophies is the ubiquitous acceptance of the dialectical process, conceived by occultist George Hegel. Oh yeah, we could do a whole other show about that. Hegel. A lot of people don't know Hegel came up with the the Hegelian dialectic. Thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis, and pitting opposites against each other to get a blended outcome. Well, he was actually into the occult. This never-ending process of merging opposites in order to produce unity or consensus is transforming churches as well as schools and business. Its evolving synthesis of opposites, whether they appear as conflicting realities or simply good and evil, is illustrated in MacDonald's Lilith. Okay, here's a quote. Lilith is the first text to employ the idea of going through a mirror into another world. Where else did we see that? In Alice in Wonderland, in The Matrix. It's put in multiple different books and movies. But Lilith's the first to employ that. Lilith is a figure of myth, Adam's first wife, and the fulcrum of the narrator's ambiguous journey. Tensions of human and animal, good and evil, body, spirit, angel, vampire, play through the text, finally emerging in a violent conflict. All right. Lilith vote, George MacDonald. All right. So, that was the excerpt about Lilith. And if you want to read more about Swedenborg, Emanuel Swedenborg and all that stuff, you can go down. The writings of George MacDonald were inspired by Emanuel Swedenborg, and you can read all about that. The occultist, who influenced him. You go all the way down. There's a ton of information there. We're going to move on to the next section. All right, let's continue on. This, well, before we continue on, actually, yeah, let me read that. This universalism shows up in some of Lewis's fiction books. In The Great Divorce, Lewis is in heaven. He speaks with George MacDonald and asks him about universalism. And MacDonald answers that Lewis cannot understand such things now. In the last of the Narnia books, The Last Battle, a pagan makes it to heaven, Aslan's land, because of his good works and his good motives. Again, salvation by works. In spite of the fact that he did not believe in Aslan and he worshipped Aslan's enemy, a false god named Tash, who's the devil. Okay? It's unbelievable. This stuff is just so in your face. So a pagan who worshipped the devil as represented by Tash, because Aslan represents Jesus, Tash represents the devil, false god, makes it into heaven. Why would C.S. Lewis put that in his book? It doesn't make any sense. Lilith shows up in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Mr. Beaver tells the children that the White Witch is descended from Lilith, who is the first wife of Adam. This could cause confusion, especially for children. Although Mr. Beaver is a fictional character, he is speaking authoritatively about the real world, the real Adam and Eve of the Bible. Right? So, yeah, it causes so much confusion. And so, that was about that guy, George MacDonald's book, Lilith. Why was, C.S. Lewis called him, I regarded George MacDonald as my master. I'm sorry, that is just astounding to me. He regarded him as his master. This guy who wrote a book called Lilith. Okay, so that's one big one. Next, we're going to take it to a whole nother level with the next guy. And these guys are part of this literary society called the Inklings that Lewis was a part of. Okay, this guy, Charles Williams. There was Owen Barfield, Charles Williams, Tolkien, who wrote the Lord of the Rings series, and C.S. Lewis were all part of this group called the Inklings. Now, Lewis spoke very highly of Charles Williams in his books, and so I read all his books, the person that wrote this article. They are novels that mix darkness and occultism with some insights about Christianity. In The Greater Trumps, the hero is a saintly woman who saves the day by doing magic with tarot cards. Again, this is another person C.S. Lewis is friends with, and they are really into the occult. Williams was as much a mixture as his books were. He started out as a serious occultist. He believed Theosophy and other occult teachings, and he joined the Golden Dawn. That's right, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a group that practices sex magic, which is ritual fornication that is done for the purposes of getting occult power. The notorious Satanist Aleister Crowley was a member of the Golden Dawn. Yes, that is correct. Williams left the Golden Dawn later after a couple years and joined the Anglican Church, but he kept some of his theosophical beliefs. He kept quite a bit. Okay, so we're going to read about that, but Charles Williams, yes, he did join the Golden Dawn, and he was friends with C.S. Lewis. So let's take a look more about that. Charles Williams. Now, if you want more about these guys, there's a book called The Inklings, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Charles Williams, and Their Friends by Humphrey Carpenter. Okay, so, a couple points here. C.S. Lewis called Charles Williams, a man whose mind was steeped in occult rituals and demonic forces, his dearest friend. This close friendship made an impact on Lewis in his writings, especially on fantasies such as That Hideous Strength. Again, which was supposed to be, some people are saying, a warning against technocracy and all this evil stuff, which doesn't make any sense when someone that was in the Golden Dawn had an impact on the book. Second part below, excerpts from the Inklings shows the dark nature of Charles Williams' beliefs and writings. All right, so let's go. From the Narnian, The Life and Imagination of C.S. Lewis by Alan Jacobs, pages 196, 198. All right, so check this out. Charles Williams. This is where we're taking it to a whole nother level. From the Narnian, perhaps the most interesting person among the Inklings was one of the temporary members of the party, Charles Williams. An odd and charismatic man, he wrote plays, poems, short and long, including a sequence based on an Arthurian legend, works of literary criticism, and theological treatises. But Williams was chiefly known for his novels, often referred to as supernatural thrillers. They include Black Masses, Magical Tarot Cards, The Crown of King Solomon, and Antichrist, and Dead People Who Can Speak with the Living, also known as necromancy. Now, already sounding great, isn't it? A reader of Williams' biography is likely to come to the conclusion that he was rather creepy. His romantic theology, which understands erotic love not so much as a path or ladder to the love of God, but as a form of the love of God, encouraged him to flirtations. Williams was married, but that didn't stop him. Now, basically what this is, referring to is that fornication magic that we're talking about. He seems to have had the same sadomasochistic tendencies as the young C.S. Lewis, though without ever escaping them. His fascination with the occult exceeded what most Christians think of as appropriate bounds, yet few who knew him saw him in this light. Lewis adored him. C.S. Lewis adored Charles Williams, finding him chivalrous, generous, even selfless, as well as a major thinker and a brilliant, though often too obscure, writer. I begin to suspect that we are living in the age of Williams, he once wrote in a letter to his friend, and our friendship with you will be our only passport to fame. The poet W.H. Auden, who worked with Williams on a collection of poetry he edited for Oxford University Press, had perhaps a stronger response. Many years after first meeting Williams, he would recall that interview in surprising terms and mark it as one of the events that led him to embrace the Christian faith. Quote, "For the first time in my life, I felt myself in the presence of personal sanctity." He's talking about Charles Williams. "I had met many good people before who had made me feel ashamed of my own shortcomings, but in the presence of this man, I did not feel ashamed. I felt transformed. into a person who is incapable of doing or thinking anything base or unloving. I later discovered that he had a similar effect on many other people. Very strange, right? How could a conversation about literary business generate such an aura of personal sanctity? Williams simply made an exceptionally powerful impression on almost all who knew him, though in more variable ways. Williams and Lewis met by exchanging fan letters. In 1936, Lewis had read Williams' novel, The Place of the Lion, and was so taken with it that, for the first time in my life, he said, he wrote a fan letter to the author. Almost immediately, he received a reply from Williams explaining that he had been just about to write a similar letter to Lewis after reading the proofs of The Allegory of Love. Williams would remain in Oxford, continuing to work for the press, but also giving occasional lecture series for the university and, of course, meeting with the Inklings. Until his sudden and unexpected death in May of 1945, Lewis was devastated by the loss, more than any other of the Inklings, the member of the Golden Dawn. Williams had effectively displaced Tolkien from his place in Lewis's life. Indeed, he called Williams, in a letter written soon after the man's death, "my dearest friend." Now, check this out. Now we'll see the dark stuff that Charles Williams was into. And we saw how close C.S. Lewis was to Charles Williams, so there's no denying that. Excerpts from The Inklings, that book. Here's some quotes that are very eye-opening. A fundamental element in Charles Williams' character, the thing that he was trying to express when he told a friend, "At bottom, a darkness has always haunted me." What was this darkness? By the time he was in his late 20s, he was making some study of the beliefs and practices of the semi-magical branch of Christianity known as Rosicrucianism, an occult system using a blend of Egyptian and Christian symbols. During this period, he read books by the Rosicrucian writer A.E. Waite, Arthur Edward Waite. He entered into correspondence with Waite, and at Waite's invitation was initiated in 1917 into an organization called the Order of the Golden Dawn. Okay? So this is a fact. Charles Williams was super into Rosicrucianism. He found A.E. Waite, who was writing books about Rosicrucianism, and then A.E. Waite initiated Charles Williams into the Order of the Golden Dawn. That's a fact. So that means someone who was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, the same secret society that Aleister Crowley was a part of, which we'll read in a second, the same person C.S. Lewis said was my dearest friend. My dearest friend. All right, let's continue. Among its first initiates was a coroner who allegedly performed necromantic rites, talking to the dead, while another early member was black magician Aleister Crowley, the self-styled great beast. But the Order of the Golden Dawn also included persons of less outlandish ways, such as William Butler Yeats, whom Williams met during the period of his membership, one or two clergy with the taste for the mystical, and A.E. Waite himself. It was this group that Williams joined. Now, I think we'll read more about that later. All right, let's continue. As a neophyte aspiring to be initiated into the Golden Dawn, he would apparently have had to declare, quote, "My soul seeking for the light of occult knowledge." We're not going to read all of the oath, but it says that, seeking for the light of occult knowledge. He also had to take an oath to keep the rites secret. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Please make sure you don't click off this, because later I'm going to read to you from someone who said, in modern day times, who said that they were raised in the Golden Dawn, and he tells you exactly what they were into. He lays it all out more clearly than anyone I've ever seen. All right, so let's continue. He also had to take an oath to keep the rites secret on penalty of a hostile current which would be set against him if he broke faith. Yeah, basically he would be cursed if he tried to spill any secrets. Okay? They always have these oaths that they have to take, that if you tell any of the secrets, you're going to get in trouble. And the higher up you go, the steeper the penalty. on penalty of a hostile current which would be set against him if he broke faith. Probably they were harmless enough, they were not harmless, based as they seem to have been on Waite's enthusiasms for Freemasonry, vaguely Christian mysticism, and Rosicrucianism, a system of occult beliefs which combines the symbolism of Christianity with the terminology of alchemy. It's a demonic counterfeit of Christianity. Yeah, exactly. Waite's own explanation of Rosicrucianism comes as near to lucidity as does any account on this opaque subject. Well, like I said, I have a more detailed one later, but the cross is the sign or the symbol of the brotherhood and its inward dedication of pure mystical wisdom. Its red color represents the mystical and divine blood of Christ. There is placed in its center a rose of the color of blood to indicate the work of sacred and divine alchemy. From Arthur Edward Waite, Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, page 107. All right, so you can go look at that. Certainly, membership of the Golden Dawn involved the performance of rituals, which we're not even going to be able to. They won't even, especially in that book, The Inklings, they're not going to tell you exactly what they did. They did some crazy stuff, but of course, it's not going to be written about here. But they were involved in performance of rituals, which Williams, with his love of rite and ceremony, entered into wholeheartedly. He had always taken care to learn by heart the words of any Golden Dawn rite. He memorized, okay? This wasn't just some guy who dabbled. Charles Williams memorized by heart all the Golden Dawn rites. There does not seem to have been anything in Waite's Temple of the Golden Dawn which was opposed to Christianity. Yeah, right. Everything there is opposed to Christianity. Yeah. Indeed, Waite, who had been brought up a Catholic, believed his practices to be part of what he called the secret tradition of Christianity. Oh, man, that opens up a whole nother can of worms. The tradition that besides the overt meaning of Christian doctrine, there was also a hidden series of truths revealed only to the elect few. Waite remarked that this Gnostic tradition, apparently of his temple, it is not in competition with the external Christian churches. Waite also made a special study of talismans and of tarot cards. These and other details of occult knowledge were to play a major part in Williams' novels. Right. So all this super detailed occult knowledge that Charles Williams learned in the Golden Dawn and being associated with all these people, he put into his novels. And then C.S. Lewis said he's like his dearest friend. Now, that whole thing where A.E. Waite was saying that the practices, he was brought up Catholic, but he believes his practice would be part of what he called the secret tradition of Christianity, like the Rosicrucianism and Golden Dawn and stuff. Well, there is some truth to that about Catholicism, other religions, that they usually have an exoteric outer shell of where most people are familiar with the explanations and meanings of things. And then there's an inner core, an esoteric core, where they have, like they say, the secret tradition, different meanings of symbols, and that there's hidden series of truths revealed only to a select few, where it's a smaller number of people, kind of like there's Islam in general, right? But then the esoteric core of that is Sufism. And there's a lot of different versions of that stuff. But within Catholicism, there's a lot of secret traditions in there. And we could talk about, Knights of Malta, Jesuits, Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem, and all these other types of things. But there's always that exoteric, esoteric version of it. And what they say basically is that they give, Albert Pike, the Freemason, said this one time, that, to people that are of lower degrees, we tell them one explanation for a symbol, but as you go up higher and higher in rank, then you tell them the real meaning of the symbols, the esoteric meaning. All right, let's continue. The next sentence refers to the Kabbalah. In one of Waite's books, he also encounters the sacred tree of the Sephiroth, a symbolic diagram based on Jewish mystical Zohar. Right, the Kabbalah based on the Zohar. Read a little bit more and then we'll move on. Perhaps, too, Williams' developing notions of human love as a ladder to God owed something to Waite's account of the concept of marriage in the Zohar, which pictures the nuptial union on earth as a type of and path or approach to the mystical union in heaven. And it was maybe also from Waite's writings that Williams acquired some of his knowledge of black magic. Whatever the source is, by the late 1920s, Williams was thoroughly acquainted with the terminology and practices of black magic. To him, it was as valid a form of symbolism as the symbols of Christianity. Didn't matter to him. That's why they don't believe in good and evil. They say they're beyond good and evil, right? No one can possibly do more than decide what to believe, says a character in one of his novels. And that was exactly what Williams himself thought. He had decided to believe in Christianity, but it was a conscious choice. And he practiced a lot of other things. So though he, Williams, soon outgrew the Golden Dawn and left the order, the symbolism and the knowledge of the occult that he acquired during his membership remained valuable to him, not least because in its extreme form, black magic was the polar opposite of Christianity, and his mind was always drawn to an awareness of the opposite pole of an argument or belief. All right, and then let's see here. We were just going to, I think we'll stop there. I think there's one more thing I wanted to read, but you can read the rest of that too if you want. There was one more thing down here. Oh yeah, right here. About that hideous strength. One may legitimately wonder what influence the Golden Dawn had on C.S. Lewis and Tolkien via Charles Williams. Certainly, that hideous strength, which is the third novel in the science fiction trilogy by C.S. Lewis, certainly that hideous strength is universally acknowledged to have been greatly affected by Lewis's acquaintance with Charles Williams, the member of the Order of the Golden Dawn. Its description of the Company of St. Anne's is certainly evocative of Williams' companions of the co-inherents from afar off. It carries, therefore, also the mark of the Golden Dawn. Tolkien was a cultural Catholic, deeply read in both folklore and pre-Reformation literature. These were themselves suffused, albeit more or less unconsciously, with the magical or hermetic worldview of which, after all, the Golden Dawn was only one exponent. The Hermetic Neoplatonic worldview has come to be commonplace throughout fantasy literature, but developments in such areas as depth psychology and the new physics suggest it may indeed have a validity beyond the pages of fiction. Okay? So the point here is, I wanted to show that it was clear that the order through Charles Williams and the Golden Dawn had an impact on C.S. Lewis writing that book, The Hideous Strength. Okay, so to say that that's warning against evil and technocracy is so absurd when he was involved with that. All right, so let's move on to the next section. That's enough with Charles Williams. Okay, so next subject. Okay. Lewis also had a close friend named Owen Barfield. He dedicated the Narnia books to him and named Lucy after Barfield's daughter. Barfield was a philosopher who started out with Theosophy and developed his own version of it. Over and over again we see Theosophy. We'll get into that in a second. But let's look at Owen Barfield, the last guy we'll look at. And again, some excerpts from that book, The Inklings. Philosopher Owen Barfield. Of all the Inklings, the group of Oxford scholars that met regularly to discuss Christianity and mythology in the early 1900s, one of the least often memorialized on the net is Owen Barfield. Okay. Now let's look. Legacy of the Second Friend by Dale Nelson, taken from that article. Many people who look into the writings of Owen Barfield are C.S. Lewis admirers who are curious about this man who was Lewis's close friend throughout his adult life. From 1919 till Lewis's death in 1963, Barfield was Lewis's legal and financial advisor, very close, and became executor of his estate. Lewis dedicated his first scholarly book, The Allegory of Love, to the wisest and best of my unofficial teachers, stating in its preface that he asked no more than to disseminate Barfield's literary theory and practice, and dedicated the first Narnian Chronicle to his friend's adopted daughter, Lucy. In his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, Lewis portrayed Barfield as the second friend, the one who never fails to challenge one and prod one to new understanding. Another sign of Barfield's thought in Lewis appears in the third lecture, The Abolition of Man, where Lewis suggests that Dr. Steiner, meaning Rudolf Steiner, the founder of Anthroposophy and of the occult Waldorf schools, which Barfield embraced as a young man, may have found the way to a redeemed scientific method that does not omit the qualities of an observed object. By the way, this is years after C.S. Lewis's supposed conversion. But more about Barfield. Barfield, raised in an agnostic family, was baptized and became a member of the Church of England only in late middle age. However, he retained the anthroposophic beliefs, his personal twist on Theosophy, he had begun to learn while a young man. Rudolf Steiner's occult science seemed to be a modern Gnosticism, complete with reincarnation, Christ and Jesus as two separate beings, a fall engineered by Luciferian beings to promote man's ascent to his destiny of spiritual freedom. Yeah, you could go down a rabbit hole about Rudolf Steiner. Like I said, we're not going to do that today, but if you go look into that guy, again, super well-known occultist. We'll continue on. Reincarnation. All right, let's see what Owen Barfield believed about that. In keeping with the teaching of Anthroposophy, Barfield espouses his belief in reincarnation on several occasions. Indeed, reincarnation is essential to his understanding of the evolution of consciousness. In Unancestral Voice, the Megid, which is a spirit being in Barfield's book, elucidates reincarnation for Burgeon. Quote, "It is only through repeated earth lives," he explains, "that mind could gradually and as a historical process become more and more individualized. That is to say, could gradually emerge from the spirit which gave birth to it. But the Western understanding of man's repeated earth lives, the Megid foresees, is not to be confused with that of the Orient, for when at last it does awaken, it will be virtually opposite to the Oriental doctrine of reincarnation, for it will not, as the East has done, lay the whole emphasis on the period of life on earth, but will understand that the opposite pole, the period purgatorial and celestial between death and birth, is of at least equal significance for the present predicament of the human soul, and it will seek to investigate that too. And secondly, it will, though with a sober realization of the cost of suffering, see rebirth as a thing to be sought rather than one to be avoided." Okay, again, this occult teachings, but he's pushing this reincarnation, repeated earth lives, having to live life over and over again. Owen Barfield, after reading English at Wadham College, Oxford, he worked as a freelance writer for 7 years. During that time, he was influenced by Rudolf Steiner, again, joined the Anthroposophical Society. So he actually joined the Anthroposophical Society, Rudolf Steiner's group. Apart from his brother, Horny Lewis, C.S. Lewis's best friend was Owen Barfield. And from 1927, they went on 3 or 4 day walking tours together in the spring. His great contribution was to persuade C.S. Lewis, and through him Tolkien, that myth and metaphor has always had a central place in our language and literature. When he was working in London, he occasionally joined the Inklings when he came to Oxford. Barfield wrote a volume of essays, Romanticism Comes of Age. Though he joined the Church of England about 1946, he continued to believe in reincarnation, which C.S. Lewis said no Christian could possibly believe in, but he did, and later wrote several books on anthroposophy. He was into the occult. Again. Okay? I think that's it here. One more quote. Evolution of Consciousness Studies in Polarity. Owen Barfield's thought ranges over many disciplines, reflecting his belief in the unity of knowledge, its all in every part character. There is no early or late Barfield to accord in current fashion. He tells us emphatically in the interview with him that follows, just the same Barfield all along. Same beliefs. All right. So that's it for Barfield. Again, he was as another guy into the occult. So Owen Barfield, Charles Williams, George MacDonald. Why? Oh, why? Is C.S. Lewis just so happens to be friends with people into the occult over and over again. He was surrounded by them. And they weren't just acquaintances. He, out of his own mouth, said, Owen Barfield, my best friend. George MacDonald, my master. Charles Williams, he was dearest to me. Right? His dearest friend. Why? Over and over again. Charles Williams was in the Order of the Golden Dawn. Why was C.S. Lewis surrounded by these guys? Why was he so close to them? Why did he connect with these guys so well, see eye to eye and all so many things? Yet he claimed to be a Christian. Doesn't make any sense. Now, if there was someone today who said that they're a Christian, and all their best friends are witches and occultists and into secret societies and one of the same secret societies that Aleister Crowley was in, I think there'd be a problem. You think that you would say, there's something up with that guy. There's something wrong with this guy saying he's a Christian and all his best friends are witches and occultists. There's no problem with the occult. By the way, the reincarnation thing, Bible says, Hebrews 9:27, as it is appointed unto man once to die, but after this the judgment. You die once, then the judgment. There's no reincarnation, no reset button, no second chances. That's it. Die once, then the judgment. But anyways, let's continue on here. Now we're going to get into Theosophy because, again, all these guys, Barfield was in Theosophy, Charles Williams, George MacDonald into that. They were all into Theosophy. Now, what is so significant about Theosophy? Well, according to Theosophy, the God of the Bible is a tyrant, and Lucifer, the devil, came to rescue mankind from him. Even this dark view of God shows up in C.S. Lewis's writings. Yes, it does. Now, I'm going to read a little bit about what C.S. Lewis thought about, how the Theosophical views kind of showed up in his writings. But then I'm going to show you I'm going to show you a very clear explanation of Theosophy, then Rosicrucianism, and the Golden Dawn, and the Kabbalah, so you understand when it references, George MacDonald and Owen Barfield and Charles Williams and Theosophy and Golden Dawn and all this other stuff, when they were into those things, you understand exactly what they were into. And then you will understand the significance of C.S. Lewis being friends with them and endorsing them. And that's going to wrap up the whole teaching. Okay, so the ending is going to be, I think, the most significant part to tie it all together and drive the point home. All right, so according to Theosophy, God of the Bible was a tyrant, and this showed up in C.S. Lewis's writings. After his wife Joy died, C.S. Lewis wrote A Grief Observed, a book describing his thoughts and emotional struggles as a result of her death. The dark theosophical view of God shows up in this book, as shown in the following quotations. Supposing the truth were God always vivisects, is it rational to believe in a bad God? Anyway, in a God so bad as all that, the cosmic sadist, the spiteful imbecile? C.S. Lewis calling God the cosmic sadist, the spiteful imbecile. Does that sound like a Christian to you? Lewis didn't stay there. He vacillated between despair and hope, but in his moments of agony and despair, the theosophical view of God came back to haunt him. I don't know if it came to haunt him or he put it in there. Again, it's one thing to have thoughts pass through your head, but then to write them down and put them in a book and edit that book and publish it with those views of God, then there's something wrong. There is another problem with his messages. I've read all of his books, and I do not recall any reference to the authority of God and to the timelessness of his ways. Lewis's worldview seems to be based primarily on human feelings, wants, and perceptions, including evolution and Freudian psychology. There's some more about that. But let's skip that. Let's go right to the Theosophy. Let's take a look at that, okay? Now we're going to go into this part. Now, the person I'm about to quote is, I got another explanation before I quote this guy. But I am going to quote a man named Roger Williamson. And this man, he's a Luciferian sorcerer, a long-time occultist. He was raised in the tradition of the Golden Dawn and all that stuff. And he was actually he founded an occult bookshop in Minneapolis called Magus Books. And years ago, I preached in front of that bookshop and did some research on this guy. Found some interesting quotes that he revealed about his beliefs, openly said this stuff, and I documented all this so that we have a nice modern day example clearly explaining what they actually believe in the occult. And so then when you hear someone was into these types of things, the Golden Dawn, you know what it really means. Okay? So let's continue. Roger Williamson, occultist author, he was the author of many books, but one of them was Lucifer Diaries. And then he gave a presentation to the Minneapolis Theosophical Society. In November 2005, I've included it here because I feel that it describes in concise language my philosophy is represented by the images of the tarot of the morning star. He made his own tarot card deck, Roger Williamson. Okay? Now, here I jump into an explanation of Theosophy. Okay? And this is important to understand that. So when you hear about Theosophy, you hear about H.P. Blavatsky, you hear about Annie Besant, you hear about any of these people, you will understand what that means, what they really believed. And all these other guys associated with C.S. Lewis. So let's deal with the Theosophy. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky heralded the dawn of the New Age movement. Her writings are the foundation for many occult fraternities. After publishing monumental works such as Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, the Theosophical Society in 1875 was formed to spread her teachings worldwide. She claimed to receive her revelations from secret chiefs or disembodied ascended masters who claimed to be aiding humanity evolving into a race of supermen. Freemasonry took notice, and many soon proclaimed her an occult genius, such as Manly Palmer Hall, the 33rd degree Freemason and Masonic historian, which he says right here, quote, "The Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled are Madame Blavatsky's gifts to humanity, and to those whose vision can pierce the menacing clouds of imminent disaster, it is no exaggeration to affirm that these writings are the most vital literary contribution to the modern world. No more can they be compared with other books than can the light of the sun be compared with the lamp of the glowworm. The Secret Doctrine assumes the dignity of a scripture." Wow. Manly Palmer Hall, 33rd degree Freemason, from the Phoenix, an illustrated review of occultism and philosophy, 1960, the Philosophical Research Society, page 122. Now, that's some pretty high praise about her books. Another interesting note, the supposed truther who supposed to expose conspiracy and stuff, Jordan Maxwell, there's a clip of him endorsing Blavatsky's books and saying that they're great books. He recently passed away, I believe, but he is on video endorsing that, just so you know. All right, let's continue. Blavatsky soon had a great host of admirers. The Theosophical Society, because we're going to get into their beliefs. The Theosophical Society had Freemasons Henry Steele Olcott, George H. Felt, appointed president and vice president, respectively. Among the early members were high-ranking Masons Charles Southern and Albert Pike. That's right, Albert Pike, a member of the Theosophical Society. In 1907, Annie Besant became president of the Theosophical Society. The beginnings of the modern New Age movement began with the search for their own Messiah, as it were. Along with 33rd degree Mason C.W. Leadbeater, Annie Besant promoted a young adept as a Messiah, Jiddu Krishnamurti. Yeah, now that's a whole other crazy story. And they went around touring around with this kid, saying he's the new Maitreya world leader, Messiah. It was crazy. Alice Bailey and husband Foster, 32nd degree Freemason, continued to interlock the workings with Theosophy with the aims of Freemasonry. Bailey, as founder of Lucis Trust, it wasn't called Lucifer. It used to be called Lucifer Publishing Company, not Lucifer Trust. So that's a mistake that some people make who research. Used to be called Lucifer Publishing Company, then it was changed to Lucis Trust. Obviously, they wanted to take out the name Lucifer. So Bailey's founder of Lucis Trust worked laboriously to fulfill the plan toward a new world religion, which her master Dwal Kul, someone, demonic entity that she channeled, had said was the ultimate aim of Freemasonry. The hierarchy had blessed both their beginnings, her master said. Now, let's look at, this is what we really want to get to, Blavatsky's view of Satan, okay? This is Theosophical view of the devil. All right, so let's take a look at that. These are direct quotes from Blavatsky. She said this: Lucifer represents life, thought, progress, civilization, liberty, independence. Lucifer is the Logos, the serpent, the savior. And then you get the pages, Secret Doctrine, Volume 2. You can go look those quotes up yourself. She said, Lucifer is the savior. Starting to get an idea of what Theosophy really is? Sympathy for the devil. Throughout the Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky praised the devil and belittles God. In Volume 1, Cosmogenesis, she wrote, quote, the devil is now called darkness by the church, whereas in the Bible he is called the Son of God. She just called the Son of God the devil. The bright star of early morning, Lucifer, see Isaiah. There's whole philosophy of dogmatic craft, and the reason why the first archangel who sprang from the depths of chaos was called Lux, or Lucifer. Now, Lucifer actually isn't an archangel. He is called an anointed cherub in the Bible. That's a different category of an angelic being. But let's continue. It was called Lux, the luminous son of the morning, or Manvantaric dawn. He was transformed by the church into Lucifer, or Satan, because he is higher and older than Jehovah and had to be sacrificed to the new dogma. Okay, so Blavatsky said Lucifer is higher and older than Jehovah. Can you get more blasphemous than that? Blavatsky went on to hail Satan as savior of man. Satan, she said, quote, Satan and his rebellious host would thus prove, when the meaning of the allegory is explained, to have refused to create physical man, only to become the direct saviors and the creators of divine man. For instead of remaining a mere blind functioning medium, impelled and guided by the fathomless law, the rebellious angel claimed and enforced his right of independent judgment and will, his right of free agency and responsibility, since man and angel are alike under karmic law. She's talking about the devil. For her, Satan is the one who frees man from death. Quote, thus Satan, once he ceases to be viewed in the superstitious, dogmatic, unphilosophical spirit of the churches, grows into the grandiose image of one who made of terrestrial a divine man, basically over and over again making man God, which is what Lucifer actually said. If you eat of the tree of knowledge, ye shall be as gods. But anyways, image of one who made of terrestrial a divine man, who gave him throughout the long cycle of Mahakalpa the law of the spirit of life, and made him free from the sin of ignorance, hence of death. So she's saying Satan freed mankind from death, from ignorance, from all these things, that he's a savior. In Volume 2, Anthropogenesis, Blavatsky continued to exalt the devil. She said, quote, Satan will now be shown in the teaching of the Secret Doctrine, allegorized as good, and sacrifice a God of wisdom under different names. Blavatsky added, in this case, it is but natural, even from the dead letter standpoint, to view Satan, the serpent of Genesis, as the real creator and benefactor. You hear what she said? It is natural to view Satan as the real creator, benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind. For it is he who was the harbinger of light, bright radiant Lucifer, who opened the eyes of the automaton created by Jehovah, as alleged, and he who was the first to whisper, in the day ye eat thereof ye shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil. Can only be regarded in the light of a savior. Again, calls the devil a savior. An adversary to Jehovah, the personating spirit, he still remains in esoteric truth the ever-loving messenger, the angel, the seraphim, the cherubim, who both knew well and loved still more, saying the devil loved, and who conferred on us spiritual instead of physical immortality, the latter a kind of static immortality that would have transformed man into an undying wandering Jew. Okay, so she's saying Satan loved us, and since he loved us, he gave us knowledge, saved us from death, freed us. Almost done here. Getting towards the end of these quotes. In the end, Blavatsky raises up Satan as the highest divine spirit to make the point clear once and for all. That which the clergy of every dogmatic religion, preeminently the Christian, points out as Satan, the enemy of God, is in reality the highest divine spirit. occult wisdom on earth, in its naturally antagonistic character to every worldly, evanescent illusion, dogmatic or ecclesiastical religions included. Thus, the Latin Church, intolerant, bigoted, and cruel to all who do not choose to be its slaves, the Church which calls itself the bride of Christ and the trustee at the same time of Peter. While talking about the Catholic Church, she's correct about that they're fake. To whom the rebuke of the Master, "Get thee behind me, Satan," was justly addressed. And again, the Protestant Church, which while calling itself Christian, paradoxically replaces the new dispensation of the old law of Moses, which Christ openly repudiated. No. Both these churches are fighting against divine truth when repudiating and slandering the dragon of esoteric wisdom. Okay? So she said it doesn't matter if it's Catholic or Protestants. She says that Christians who are fighting against the truth when they repudiate and slander the dragon of esoteric wisdom, when they slander the devil. For her, in antiquity, in reality, Lucifer or Luciferus is the name of the angelic entity presiding over the light of truth. And last quote, the logical consequence of these beliefs is that for Blavatsky, the fall was a result of man's knowledge, for his eyes were opened. Indeed, he was taught wisdom and the hidden knowledge of the fallen angel, for the latter had become from that day his manus, mind and self-consciousness, and now it stands proven that Satan, or the red fiery dragon, the lord of phosphorus, brimstone was a theological improvement, and Lucifer, or light bearer, is in us. It is our mind, our tempter and redeemer, our intelligent liberator and savior from pure animals. Okay, so, wow. Now, I mean, that is just, to me, insane that we have so many quotes from Blavatsky, overwhelming quotes of her praising the devil, saying the devil's good, the devil's the savior, he freed us from death, gave us knowledge, the devil loves us, the devil's good and Jehovah's bad, all this stuff. And what were Owen Barfield and Charles Williams and McDonald and all these guys into? Theosophy. Right here. One last thing. Let's hear about Blavatsky's hatred for Christian churches. Blavatsky's proclamation of universal brotherhood did not extend to Christians and their churches. No, of course not. You're not universal brotherhood. Everyone except Christians. In 1877, she said that ISIS Unveiled was in particular directed against theological Christianity, the chief opponent of free thought. It contains not one word against the pure teachings of Jesus. Yeah, right. It's twisting. But unsparingly denounces their debasement into pernicious ecclesiastical systems that are ruinous to man's faith in his immortality and his God, and subversive of all moral restraint. We cast our gauntlet at the dogmatic theologians who would enslave both history and science, and especially at the Vatican. She really did hate the Vatican, and especially the Jesuits. We can talk about that another day. But whose despotic pretensions have become hateful to the great portion of enlightened Christendom. Now, you know, different factions within Satan's kingdom fight with each other. That's something you got to understand. But anyways, in 1888, Blavatsky reiterated, the secret doctrine must someday become the just karma of the churches, more anti-Christian than the representative assemblies of the most confirmed materialists and atheists. Okay, so she was no fan of Christians. Absolutely hated them. So, having said all that, how is it that all these guys, these inklings, could be followers of a philosophy created by a woman who literally exalts the devil as the savior, hates Christians, and yet C.S. Lewis is supposed to be a Christian, friends with all these guys? Something's not making sense, guys. Not making sense. Now, let's finish the teaching with Roger Williamson's speech to the Theosophical Society. A couple quotes here where he talks about the Golden Dawn, Rosicrucianism, and the Kabbalah, so that you understand when we were talking about that earlier, when we were referencing those things, this gives you a little bit more insight into what it's talking about. So, back to Williamson's speech to the Theosophical Society. Listening to this presentation, you might feel that it doesn't relate to its title, Angel of Light. However, I consider the Angel of Light, Lucifer, to be a dynamic life principle and not a historical or mythological figure. To me, Lucifer is a geometric function, a life principle which we all possess. It opens the door to other realms of reality, encouraging us to lead a fuller and more creative lives. So, he had no problem with Lucifer, and apparently the Theosophical Society had no problem with this speech either. My background is one of ceremonial magic as practiced by the Golden Dawn, okay? So he tells you right here, this guy was raised in it by his mother. Actually, he admits in another part that he was raised by his mother into magic, and he says ceremonial magic as practiced by the Golden Dawn. So if anyone would know what the Golden Dawn was into and they believed, it would be this guy. And he says, the Golden Dawn, founded in 1888, was in some ways a reaction by its founders to Eastern philosophy flooding into England, and at the time by its citizens returning from the colonies. The founders of the Golden Dawn wanted to offer a Western tradition to balance the influx from the East. Now look at this. He explains the Golden Dawn like this. The core of the Golden Dawn system is the Hebrew QBL or Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is a Hebrew word that translates as to receive. It is a system of attainment that classifies diverse forms of energy. It is a vehicle for obtaining altered states of consciousness, and for communicating with entities which may not be of this earth, universe, or dimension. Okay? Now, this guy says the core of the Golden Dawn system is Kabbalah. And he says Kabbalah is a vehicle for communicating with entities not of this dimension. There are many who believe that the origin of the Kabbalah has its roots in Egypt and the Tigris and Euphrates Valley, Babylon, right? The Babylonian Talmud goes all the way back there. And remember that the Jews were captives in Babylon at one time. Places visited by the Hebrews in the course of their history. It is therefore an eclectic, they were slaves in Egypt also for 400 years. It is therefore an eclectic philosophy thanks to its diverse roots. Now let's hear what he has to say about Golden Dawn and Rosicrucianism. The Golden Dawn was greatly influenced by the Rosicrucian manifestos published anonymously by Johann Valentin Andrei between 1610 and 1612. Okay, so he says Golden Dawn was influenced by all these different things. First he says Rosicrucianism. Then he says the works of Dr. John Dee, court astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I of England, he founded something called Enochian magic. The works of Eliphas Levi, the French magus who claimed to have summoned to a visible appearance the spirit of Apollonius of Tyana. Francis Barrett, the author of The Magus, a compendium of magical technique and philosophy published in 1801. And Lord Bulwer Lytton, I talked about him before. He wrote about the Vril, the author of Zanoni, who had the reputation of being a Rosicrucian. Added to this were their translations of medieval grimoires and diverse forms of divination. All of these traditions were fused into a coherent system using the Kabbalah as its unifying structure. He's saying all this to say this is what the Golden Dawn was made out of, their beliefs. Golden Dawn work, in its most basic overview, consists of two functions, ritual and astral workings. The ritual creates the gateways into other dimensions, the energies of these dimensions, and makes them tangible. It is from these other dimensions, astral realms that are wells of power, that the magician/shaman derives his or her empowerment. Okay? So he says the Golden Dawn consists of opening gateways into other dimensions and then taking energy out of these dimensions for the magician themselves, getting power from other dimensions which you're opening gateways to. These astral realms have now, you know what's interesting? He says, now think about this. The ritual creates gateways into other dimensions, right? And you get energy from all those other dimensions. Now, we were looking earlier at this book called Lilith by George MacDonald. And C.S. Lewis said George MacDonald was as my master. And in the book Lilith, it's the first text to employ the idea of going through a mirror into another world. What's Roger Williamson say? Golden Dawn ritual creates gateways into other dimensions. Now do you see the connection? And guess what? You think it's any different in the Narnia books? Well, guess what happens? The lion, the witch, and the wardrobe. They go through the wardrobe into another world, another dimension. Same thing. Earth's energies. These astral realms have a very ethereal, plastic nature, much like a dream, and so gleaning coherent substance requires a reliable structure of reference for the testing and clarification of his experiences. This is the role of the Kabbalah. This conscious ability to tap diverse forms of energy, be empowered by them, and to cleanse our sense of perspective, I call magic. In my own work, I replaced the word ritual for that of machine to remove the technique from religion. A machine is a system that converts energy from one form into another, a vehicle of transformation. Machines can be used to transport people or things from one place to another, communicate with other life forms, and shape or transmute materials. Magic is a machine that is used to transport you from one place or dimension to another, communicate with other life forms, and shape and transmute you. Roger Williamson. Communicate with other life forms, being spirits from another dimension. Okay? So, I'm going to read you one last Bible verse at the end, but that pretty much is the end of the teaching. Now, let's talk about a few things. It's undeniable. C.S. Lewis's fascination with the occult, he said it himself. It's undeniable he was very close friends and admired these friends, George MacDonald, Charles Williams, Owen Barfield, and others. He endorsed their writings like Lilith. Their writings were filled with the occult. And even in real life, they were into it. This isn't just fancy. You can't just write it off and say it's all fantasy and in novels, because Charles Williams was actually in the Order of the Golden Dawn. Owen Barfield was into Anthroposophy, was associated with Rudolf Steiner. These guys were into Theosophy in real life. They actually were into the stuff in real life. And then all they did was put their beliefs into their books. And guess what? So did C.S. Lewis, because he was surrounded by them. Okay? And you can't have all these guys be your best friends and you're not into the same stuff. That's absolute garbage. And he even admitted he was into the occult. Now, we might not have a formal record that C.S. Lewis was initiated into the Golden Dawn or OTO or Rosicrucian or anything like that. That doesn't matter. He's surrounded by those guys. He understands all the concepts and he put it in his books. And then guess what? They gave the books to children and they taught the children occult concepts and magic. That's all it is. Now, these books, actually, we can't really even talk about it, even how much more crazy it is, but to those that have a little bit, maybe an understanding of what I'm talking about, there's also connections with Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. There was a connection with that dude. And if you understand anything about those books, Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, and what those books have been used for, and those types of things, then you can understand that the Chronicles of Narnia books were used for the same type of things. Now, if you know, you know. But continuing on here, C.S. Lewis was into the occult and friends with occultists, and that is a fact. And that would mean not a Christian. Now, I can do a whole other show where I talk about all kinds of quotes where he outlines his beliefs, and there are so many things that go against the Bible, all kinds of heresies and false doctrine, and we might do that. But for right now, this is enough to blow the whole thing apart. The mythology that you have in your mind of C.S. Lewis about who he really was. And let me show you exactly who he was. Remember that Roger Williamson mentioned angel of light, Lucifer as an angel of light? Well, the Bible has something to say about that. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 13. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. No marvel, don't be surprised, don't be shocked. For Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light to deceive, right? He doesn't come with a pitchfork and horns looking ugly. He transforms into an angel of light to appear as good. And the Bible says, just like Satan does that, so do his apostles, false apostles. That Satan's ministers are transformed as the ministers of righteousness, just like C.S. Lewis. Minister of Satan transformed into minister of righteousness. Now, we give you the evidence today of who that man really was. And I hope you see, you got to get far away from those books. You got those books, get them out of your house. Get them, those books and those movies, away from your kids immediately. And don't look back. And it'll be a really good thing that you do. And will be helpful. All right. So that's it for today. Hopefully that was helpful to you. I'm not trying to intentionally make you mad and to hurt you. Just bringing the truth. That's it. And if you respond to the truth, if you repent, if you humble yourself, if you accept it, then it will help you. It will not hurt you. All right? Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. Check out the description below for all the associated links. God bless you. Have a good day.